we're still negotiating. And I said ACT didn't have many sticking points. Well, the referendum on the principles of the treaty, which I personally could live without, but I'm not doing the negotiations. Meantime, it would seem the country is just getting on fine. Is it not, Chris Trotter? I mean, things seem all right.
Hello?
Hello, you're there, Chris?
I am, yes.
Yeah, well, I was just saying, despite the fact that, and we rightly predicted, I think, last Thursday that Chris Hipkins would get sworn in again as Prime Minister, not having an active government doesn't feel too bad to me.
Well, yes. The difference between King Log and King Stork, as Aesop told people about over 2,000 years ago, frogs in the pond, you know. They were very dissatisfied with their king, who was nothing but an old log that just sat there, and they hopped all over it, and it never made one complaint, and it never did anything to the frogs at all. And they said, "What sort of a king is this? Give us a real king, Zeus." And Zeus said, "You sure?" And they said, "Oh yeah, this king Log doesn't do anything. It's really boring. Give us a proper king." So Zeus said, "Your wish is my command," and he sent them King Stork. Well, storks like frogs. The frogs were soon looking back nostalgically at King Log, but there we are.
Yeah. So we are in this interregnum, and look, certain people saying, "Oh, this is terrible, this is incompetence," because everything seems to me to have been delayed because of the timing of those specials. I mean, if they'd been counted 2 weeks earlier, we'd be 2 weeks ahead of the game here, wouldn't we?
Yes, and it's not the only thing that's gone wrong with this election, although it hasn't made a very big story all up, except for the time it took to count the specials. Part of the problem, I think, is that it was a grossly underfunded exercise. This is what I've been told. And the example that I was given was that people ran out of special voting forms in the polling booths. And do you know what the instructions were to the election workers on the day, those who had booths in schools?
Yeah.
Oh, go and copy the forms on the school's photocopier.
Ooh, okay.
Ooh, yeah, that was my reaction too. You know, that's not the way you run an election in a grown-up country. But anyway, perhaps they should put more people on the job. Yeah. And get the count over and done with more expedition next time. I think everybody would be very pleased if they did that.
Yeah, Chris, I think it's kind of pointless, and I know the poor old mainstream media journalists have got column centimetres and seconds to fill, so they've got to write something. I don't think anyone's got the inside line on what's really happening in these three-way talks, but I guess some themes are emerging. And that is that, well, let's start with New Zealand first. They want another provincial growth fund, essentially. You can dress it up, call it what you want. They want a few billion to throw around in the provinces and try and get themselves a safe electorate seat or shore up their support, right? They want a pork barrel.
Yes, and to be perfectly honest, I can see why. Because if you look back at the last 6 years, very few of the things the state initiated came to anything. Of the few that did, a great many of them were out of that provincial growth fund for the very simple reason that it could move resources to people who need them at a much faster rate and with far fewer impediments along the way than was normally the case. So I can see why New Zealand First wants to keep that going, quite apart from the pork barrelling aspects, which is,
okay. And now the question is, how does that get paid for? You can divert some money from so-called climate change policies, but also questions that both ACT and New Zealand First seem to be raising about the foreign buyers thing, and I guess the nationalism, the broad-based nationalism of New Zealand First, and I suppose fiscal responsibility of ACT combine in this, and some questions being asked about tax cuts, Nationals' planned tax cuts, and the foreign buying tax and the lifting of the ban on foreign purchases. That seems to be a sticking point for ACT and New Zealand First. That suggests National might have to let that go too.
That would be a real blow for National. They'll fight that tooth and nail, I would think. Although one of the pieces of information that has emerged is the way that New Zealand First and ACT are apparently ganging up on National, to use a schoolyard expression. They realise that it's far better to have a common position on some things than to be picked off one at a time. So National, on that score, as you say, there are reasons from both of the coalition partners for putting an end to that tax policy. But that would begin National's term, and Chris Luxon's term in particular, with an absolute humiliation. And I wonder if they can afford that.
Yeah.
I mean, Chris Luxon said, the gentleman's not for turning on tax cuts, and that is the bottom line. And if the first thing he does is give away tax cuts, well, that's not a good start.
Yeah. All right. So there's all that. And the other, I guess, thorny one, tricky one, is the referendum on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. And referendums are such terrible things. We don't know what the question would be. We don't know what it would be designed to achieve. I think that New Zealand First most definitely, and most National MPs actually back the idea from ACT that the principles of the treaty, widely reinterpreted, misinterpreted, you could drive a truck through them, that we should get rid of them, and we should get rid of them as a way to run public services. I guess the question is a referendum, and we've just seen in Australia on our election night how often referendums don't give anyone what they really wanted. That seems to be a sticking point too. You said National would find it hard to compromise on its tax policy. How hard would ACT find it to compromise on the referendum?
Pretty hard, I would say. Pretty hard. Although, as you say, there is much that could be done to preface, if you like, a referendum, push the whole thing off towards the end of the term, or perhaps having passed a whole series of small acts of Parliament addressing the program that ACT has piecemeal rather than in one fell swoop, might actually obviate the need for a referendum altogether. Fascinatingly, with a bit of financial assistance from the Manukau Urban Maori Authority, Matthew Hooton, of all people, has written a 30,000-word essay explaining why Conservatives would not, in the end, back a referendum.